Hey, everybody. Happy Monday to all of you. We are excited to talk a bit about what ArtBlocks is doing, generative art. Aaron, what you do at as the director of engineering. And I accidentally pressed the go live button without giving Aaron an advance warning. So, Aaron, we are live for all the NFT party people out there. Can you please introduce yourself to everybody? I'd appreciate it.
Hello, I'm Aaron Penne. I'm an artist and engineer, currently working as a director of engineering at ArtBlocks, which is an absolute dream, being able to help build the future of generative art. I've been making generative art for several years and been in the NFT space since 2019, 2020, around there. And it's been amazing. Looking forward to talking.
So all of those overlap with you as the director of engineering and being a generative artist. There's certainly distinctive differences. Can you share a bit about your journey as a generative artist?
Yeah, I came from the creative side when I was much younger. I was always drawing, writing poetry, kind of exploring the creative outlets, but that wasn't leading to a real job, of course. So at a certain point, I switched my focus from writing and poetry over to electrical engineering. I was in school for English, for writing, and switched over to engineering, followed that through, got a graduate degree, and worked as an electrical engineer at Northrop Grumman for some time. And I was working on a team that dealt with sensors, sensor data, and I had to visualize this data in order to convince chief engineers of decisions. And I sort of understood that these data visualizations or capturing this information in this visual way was more important than the tweaks we were doing to the hardware. And so I internalized that and pivoted my career a little bit towards the data engineering, data science world, which was obviously in vogue at the time, several years ago. And while doing that, explored the data visualization aspect and kind of pushed the bounds of Edward Tufte's rules, trying to be a little more creative and abstract with the data visualizations and like Nadia Bremer's style of making it more colorful and exciting. During those explorations, I found this budding creative coding community online, social media avenues, befriended Ben Kovac and Tyler Hobbs on Reddit, and I befriended a whole bunch of amazing artists on Instagram, Twitter, that sort of thing. And I saw this kind of disparate community and decided to create a club to bring all these folks together. So we made this Slack group that started out with 50 or so generative artists, and now it has about 400 of these folks that all share works in progress. We critique each other. We do this sort of Parisian salon experience, talking about each other's work. And for me, that's been like the primary thing that I focus on, is the people in the community. Creating my artwork as an expression around that, I think. And so I've been pursuing it that way. While I was working at Amazon, I worked at AWS for a couple of years and made the pivot from there over to ArtBlocks in order to sort of combine what I was doing at night, just doing artwork all the time, and using my software skills in order to help build something that can be beneficial to other artists.
So with generative art, what's the perspective on you as the artist, the augmentation of the automation with technology, and the community? Because none of it really matters if the community is not interested in it anyway. So what's the balancing act for that? And there's 400 of you together in this one community. Is that talked about a lot?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, generative art has a lot of conceptual underpinnings, I feel like. The way I describe generative art, which is it's up to individual interpretation what the definition of it is, but my interpretation is that when you're making generative art, you're making something which creates something else. It doesn't need to be code based. It can be anything, basically. That you're creating a system, you're creating some rules, some structure, which then goes and creates the visual, audio, whatever output. Brian Eno has a fantastic quote where he describes Brian Eno, the generative musician who plays with generative concepts. Fantastic quote describing composers as gardeners. Mm-hmm. And I kind of use that to fuel or shape my practice, I think, and describe my practice is as a gardener, not necessarily as like a sculptor taking some image or visual that I want to create and chiseling away until I have it, or like a painter building up layers until I have my output. It's more like a gardener. I'm finding my seeds and soil and tending to these systems as they grow sort of organically. So I'm in sort of a dialogue, I suppose, not with the machine, I'd say, but with my own mistakes or explorations while working with the computer and code as a tool. I'm not a huge fan of saying I'm like having a dialogue with the computer, because the computer is just a dumb tool, right? It's doing whatever I tell it to. So I'm really having a dialogue with my flaws or explorations while building. And yeah, the community part of it, I think we all have our own sort of unique approach. A lot of amazing artists and poets, for example, at the Verse use artificial intelligence to fill in gaps in work that they've already created, or to create images that inspire further outputs, or they're using the code itself as a form of art, which I explored a little bit in my most recent project, Within Without. It asks the question, is the artwork the code, or is it the visual output? And my answer to that is that it is both simultaneously, but it changes for each person and for each project, really. It's a great question.
I'm glad you brought up gardening. There's multiple processes with gardening, right? There's the initial landscape construction. It's the most costly part. And then there's the maintenance. And that's where the question comes in. Sure. For the creator, the landowner, right? Am I going to hire crews to come in on a weekly basis and like manage my garden? Or am I going to get out and water it myself? And I thought about this yesterday. My neighbor has 3 acres and certainly doesn't have to water his own garden, but he's out there on a Sunday watering his garden. And that got me thinking about the psychological benefits of taking care of what you're creating, even if you're augmented with a landscape crew during certain times. When you look at generative art as gardening, how do you see it differently in terms of the creation and then any sort of ongoing involvement with that project, which would maybe feel like maintenance, watering the grass, for instance?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. What I was thinking first when you're describing the neighbor who's watering the garden, even though they don't have to water in the yard, that I think is like a powerful sort of mindfulness approach to life. Spending your time doing those kinds of activities is very rewarding if you are able to use it as an opportunity to bring some presence to the moment. So I love that. When I'm coding and debugging, that state is certainly what I'm after, I suppose, during the process, that kind of flow state. When you're squashing bugs that aren't popping out the way you want, it's hard to get into that, of course. So it's a little bit of a challenge. But the maintenance aspect that you described, I think how I'm in translating that in my mind is that it's the community part. So when I'm creating a project, I've spent all this time on the front end, maybe like 6 months making some system. I release it to the public, and now it's out there in the world. And for a lot of folks, that's like the end of the project. For me, that's like the midpoint, or even the part of the beginning of the project. It's up to artists, in my opinion, to maybe not in all projects, but in many, to help explain what's going on, to help show, kind of reveal the layers of a project. So there's a lot of community engagement that's really critical, I think. Finding pieces of your work that you've now created and are out there in the public that resonate with your collectors, and helping highlight those to art appreciators, and help them understand like why this is interesting, why this is important, why an NFT where the code is embedded in the NFT itself is more technically profound than hosting an image on IPFS. The kind of work I do is typically on-chain generative artwork. So the code itself lives on the blockchain, which has so many interesting, so many interesting parts to it around like permanence and around provenance and all these kinds of things we can get distracted on. But for me, that maintenance aspect is all about education. I think bringing the artwork to more places, right? Having the artwork shown in different galleries, different shows. I've had my project showing in Germany and Italy and New York and all these other places. And then highlighting that, of course, back to the collector base to show, look, maybe there's no utility in the Moonbird sense of things, but there is some very real value being brought to the project by the artist, and highlighting this work that you own in all of these venues, and explaining that it's not just this one image, it's all these things, it's the system, it's this deep multi-layered project. So yeah, that's what I think of when I think of the maintenance side of it.
Well, I find it very interesting to talk with you. I have all these different questions, but we should wrap up our conversation. Let me ask this: when it comes to on-chain, specific to generative projects, I don't know that everybody defines on-chain the same. Mm-hmm. I think that cyber brokers made a lot of noise recently about being on chain with their artwork as SVG files on Ethereum because it cost them 100 ETH to do so. And so that was a big commitment that they made after the project had sold out. And so I think that they started a lot of chatter, and I think that their definition of on-chain is on the Ethereum chain. So can you help me understand your definition of on-chain? Yes. And what you think is the best approach today? And maybe it's not the only, but you think like, hey, if I was going to do a project, I'd probably do it this way for this reason, and where you think things might be going when it comes to on-chain generative art projects.
Yeah, fantastic question. Like anything, it's up to individual interpretation to say what on-chain is. I think my interpretation is that the artwork, the code that is primarily responsible for generating an image, creating the visual output, audio output, whatever it is that the NFT is when you're trading it or collecting it or showcasing it, is the code can recreate that image at any point in time. So in 100 years, there's no more IPFS for whatever reason, something happens, you're able to recreate your image. I always think of, if I have a print from some artist, some beautiful painting that I love, for example, this plotter artwork from Paul Rickers that I absolutely love. If my house were to burn down, I would lose that artwork. If I had the NFT of that artwork, that's not an issue. Now, let's say the IPFS storage of that image goes down, which is totally possible, then I lose the artwork. I still have the NFT, but I lose the visual. That would be a devastating position to be in. So I think on-chain means that I'm able to regenerate that image at any point in time, as long as the Ethereum blockchain exists, right? You have some people like Club NFT put together by Art Gnome who are working to make these things more permanent. In my opinion, that's amazing. But on-chain generative artwork doesn't need that because it already exists. The artwork is itself embedded. There's different layers, of course. So autoglyphs are the first on-chain generative artwork. Everyone knows what an autoglyph looks like if you're in this space. Those images that we're all familiar with are not the actual autoglyph artwork. They're a convenience rendering that Larva Labs did. The actual autoglyphs artwork is a string of ASCII characters. When you go to the smart contract and you pull your token URI, you get the output. It's just a long string of, hashtag, dash, vertical line, whatever it is. And it's up to someone to go interpret that instruction set into an output. So it's not possible now necessarily, unless you're using SVG stuff like what you described, to have an image generate from the Ethereum virtual machine. Maybe it is possible in some edge cases, but it's very tricky. So most things that are output are instructions. And that's what generative art that I make is it's JavaScript instructions or whatever the language is. And so as long as you can take those instructions and run them somewhere, like DefBeef uses the C language, which is more robust than JavaScript as far as longevity goes, then you're good to go. So that's a very long rambling answer to your question. When I think of on-chain, I think the ability to recreate the artwork should live in the NFT contract itself.
Well, I'm glad I asked. I find my conversation with you to be educational. It's really nice to hear your background and kind of how you're viewing things. Well, we're looking forward to having you come and be at NFT.NYC. I believe you're speaking on bridging the gap between the physical and the digital on a panel. And so I think you're going to bring some great insight to that. So, Aaron, thank you so much for jumping on with me today. I look forward to seeing you next month at NFT.NYC. And just want you to know, I think there's a lot of people that are very thankful for the artwork that you've helped create, the code that you've helped build and the community that you've brought together. It's not one thing, it's many things that you're involved with the industry, and we recognize that and celebrate it.
That's great. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to NFT.NYC. I think it's going to be an awesome time.
It will